What's up guys, I'm OC Alligator. Now what we got here today is an iceberg video. So I'm going to be covering the Mask iceberg chart. The Mask as in with Jim Carrey, not Mask with Eric Stoltz. That's a completely different movie right there. So I've been working on this video for about a year now. It was originally intended to come out in 2022, but 2022 was a steaming pile of dog shit, so here we are in 2023. So the original video was about 90% complete, but I didn't like how it was looking, so I decided to start from scratch. From having to remake the original iceberg chart to my equipment being just as useful as a Nintendo speedboard, I've run into a lot of issues along the way of making this video. But here we are. Let's go ahead and get right into this. The Mask is one of my favorite movies of all time. I always enjoyed it when I was a kid. And as you might know, I might know a thing or two about The Mask of Loki. Anyways, we're 2 minutes in, so let's go ahead and get started. The Mask is based on a comic book series. You wouldn't be surprised to know that The Mask is based on a comic book. The character made his debut in 1982, and most notably featured in Dark Horse's Mayhem anthology, which was cancelled after 4 issues, but the Mask comic series picked back up in 1991. The comic book is completely drastic to the movie we know and love. It bears a resemblance, but it's nothing like the movie. It's dark, gruesome, and extremely scary. It was awesome! Some of the main differences include the Mask's origins. Stan Lee is an unlikable jerk who hates everyone and simply wants everyone dead, to which he puts the mask on and goes on a killing spree, rather than being a bank clerk who's considered a nice guy who finds the mask and puts it on and becomes a superhero. Well, kinda. And unlike in the movie, several people wear the mask. Well, of course in the movie, apart from Stanley, you had Dorian and Milo, but in the comic book, everyone was wearing the mask. The comics started off gory as hell, but as soon as the movie came out, they started being more cartoonish. And after Joker Mask in 2000, the comic series concluded. Conceived as a horror film. Given that the comic book was violent as hell, The Mask was initially conceived as a horror film. This is evident from the disturbing as hell concept art. New Line Cinema was looking to have a new Freddy Krueger type of character for a new horror franchise at the time. Charles Russell was chosen to direct the project, whose other work includes A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3 Dream Warriors. Sometime during production, they decided to change the tone of the movie because they thought it would be too much. Therefore, they let Jim Carrey do his thing. Animated series. After the movie came out, an animated series was released which ran for 3 seasons. This show has gone on to be loved by many Mask fans. It featured Rob Paulsen as Stanley Ipkiss / The Mask, but it didn't feature Tina. It did, however, take some cues from the comic book, particularly using characters not seen in the movie. It doesn't feature Tina, but it does feature Peggy, and in one episode, she wears the mask. And so does Dr. Newman, and he's the only character in the show to be reprised by his actor from the movie. This show is off the walls. Super Nintendo video game. Coinciding with the movie, there was a tie-in video game for the Super Nintendo by Black Pearl Software. The game received moderately positive reviews from critics, who were particularly pleased with its faithful recreation of humor and visual style of the film, while criticizing the level design and difficulty. It is a maze game, no, not that maze game, which involves you playing as the Mask, running around different areas and fighting crime. Eventually, you get to Dorian in the final level of the game, who also has the mask. Well, that's weird. Son of the Mask. Son of the Mask is a garbage fire, Son of the Mask is a sequel to The Mask, released in 2005, which doesn't feature Jim Carrey or any of the cast from the first movie besides Ben Stein. It revolves around Tim Avery, played by Jamie Kennedy, whose dog brings him the mask, and so he puts it on and he has some sex, which results in a baby who is born with the powers of the mask. This movie has been considered one of the worst movies ever made, let alone one of the worst sequels of all time. The continuity makes no sense in some areas, the CGI is absolutely horrendous, and Jamie Kennedy has a whole video series about his experience with the movie if you want to check it out. Smokin'! An iconic line said by the Mask in the movie. Space Jam: A New Legacy. Space Jam: A New Legacy is that crappy sequel to Space Jam which released about 2 years ago now, which featured LeBron James. Story for another day. Anyways, in the movie, during the Ultimate Game, you can see the Mask standing around in the audience. Originally, he was supposed to be the referee, as evident by his shirt. That was one of the many photos of Space Jam 2 which was leaked in 2019. He was rumored to be played by Jim Carrey, but he was actually played by another actor. I'm not sure who it was, but I have seen his behind-the-scenes photos on Instagram. Action figures. The movie and the show spawned lots of merchandise. One of these pieces of memorabilia was the action figures, one of which I have right here. These toys were released by Kenner. They weren't perfect, but they were awesome. Cancelled Mask 2. The Mask 2 was the planned sequel to The Mask, which would have released in 1996. It is unknown what the sequel would have actually been about, but it was cancelled after Jim Carrey turned down the $10 million offer to star in the movie. Following, we got the animated series and, of course, the travesty called Son of the Mask. Nintendo Power Contest. In 1995, there was a Nintendo Power Contest to star as an extra in The Mask 2. In this contest, you could also win a mask, a copy of the mask for the SNES, and a Nintendo Power t-shirt. This contest obviously went nowhere. The winner of the contest was a man named Nathan Rung, who was 12 years old at the time. He revealed himself to be the winner in 2015. He was notified of his victory within a month or two, and afterwards Nintendo would call him up every few months to keep him informed of new developments. Unfortunately for him, the movie was cancelled and Nintendo issued him an apology consisting of $5,000, a Mask 2 jacket which he can't find, a box of SNES games including The Mask, and best of all, a phone call from the voice actress of Princess Peach. Loki. Loki is the Norse god of mischief, brother to Thor and son of Odin. In The Mask, it is theorized that Loki created the mask, and it only works at night, as Loki is a night god. In Son of the Mask, it is confirmed that Loki created the mask, as he comes to Earth looking for it. Here, he is played by X-Men actor Alan Cumming, and also he appears in Odin's 9, which was made by the same people who made Revenge of the Mask. Dr. Pretorius. Pretorius is the main antagonist from The Mask the Animated Series. Being the most reoccurring adversary of The Mask in the cartoon, having appeared in all 3 seasons of the series, he can be considered to be the arch-enemy. Notably, he is voiced by Tim Curry. Pretorius is a mad scientist who had his own head removed from his body and placed on tiny, robotic, spider-like legs which could attach to a larger android body. In one episode of the show, he, of course, puts on the mask. Calloway wore the mask. On a couple of occasions, Lieutenant Kellaway has gotten a hold of the mask and put it on. As Big Head, another name for the mask in the comic book, Kellaway uses the mask to kill criminals. The power becomes too much for him to handle, and he almost kills his own partner. He takes off the mask and buries it in the cement in his basement. Jim Carrey's dedication to the role. Of course, Jim Carrey had his own influences for the character of Stanley Ipkiss / The Mask. For a few examples, the yellow suit originated from an early Jim Carrey comedy sketch in which he wore a yellow polyester jacket which his mother made for him. He has also stated that Stanley is based on a lot of his father. In his own words, he's like a cartoon. I mean, he's just not natural. I use my father in a lot of different things. Stanley Ipkiss is a lot of my father. Another interesting thing of note, the large teeth that the mask has were originally intended for non-speaking scenes, which doesn't really make sense in my opinion, but Jim managed to speak with them just fine, so they kept them. Cameron Diaz's film debut. This was the first movie to feature the actress Cameron Diaz. She auditioned for the role 12 times before finally landing the part of Tina Carlisle. After this, she'd go on to be in other movies such as There's Something About Mary, and of course she would provide the voice of Princess Fiona in the Shrek movies. The Mask vs. Ace Ventura. Not only did The Mask have an animated series, but so did Ace Ventura and later along the line, Dumb and Dumber. So interestingly, Ace appeared twice in The Mask the animated series. On one instance, Ace sat on the mask and so of course, his ass turned into the mask. Oh jeez. Female-led reboot. In 2019, Mike Richardson expressed interest in a gritty female-led Mask reboot. I'd like to see a really good physical comedian. I have one in mind, but I'm not going to say her name. We have a lot of convincing to do for this particular actor, but we'll see. You never know what's coming in the future. We have some ideas, he shared. Now, a female Mask character could work, as it's been done in the comics and in the animated series. I'm down for it as long as it's not just pandering fluff and it's actually trying to tell a good story, which can be done. As long as it's nothing like Ghostbusters 2016 or any of this other woke feminist trash that's been coming out recently. If it is to happen, it's better off as its own thing. I would rather see them adapt a story from the comic book than them try to copy off of the Jim Carrey movie. It didn't work the first time you tried to make a Mask sequel without Jim Carrey, and it probably won't work the second time. Just saying. Whether it's a sequel or a reboot, if you're just trying to be Jim Carrey, it's not gonna work. Revenge of the Mask series. Revenge of the Mask and Revenge of the Mask 2 are fan films directed by Lance Cowis which were released in 2018 and 19 consecutively. These are really good. I have reviewed the first one on Surround Productions back when I was about 15 years old. The first one is about a man named Alan who has a bad gambling habit and he's looking to get revenge on these guys who beat him up and his wife over some debt. He ends up finding the mask after being washed ashore, and once he puts it on, he goes on a killing spree similar to as seen in the comic. I love some of the shots which are directly taken from the comic, like when he rips his face off. The first one is awesome and I would wholeheartedly recommend it. The second one also features Alan, but it's more in a past tense. It rather focuses on Kellaway, whose daughter brings home the mask, as teased at the end of the first one. He puts it on, well, the mask jumps onto his face, and he also causes mischief. Except we barely even see it. There's one scene with him as the mask, and then everything else is on the news. Then he tosses it into a chest, and then that's that. The end. And 2 isn't as good as the first one, but it's still a fun movie. I liked the stuff with Alan and Walter and Ricky, but I think the things with Kellaway could have used a little work. But I'm willing to give it some slack since it's a fan film. I don't know if there'll be another one. I'm hoping there might be. They're trying to get the supercut released, but we haven't heard about that in a while. YouTube and Dark Horse keep giving them shit about it, as both movies have been removed from YouTube but later re-uploaded. One thing I found interesting is that the mask transformation in the first one is half practical. They sold some of the props, so I'm sure it's in good hands now. Masks were
disgusting.
This refers to a scene in Son of the Mask, only seen on certain DVD releases of the movie, involving green sperm with faces, racing to get to the egg so they can make the baby. Just... ew. What were they thinking when they made this scene? It's just no. And even worse is this concept art, which features the likeness of Jim Carrey and Eddie Murphy. Ugh, just take it off the screen. That's nasty. Eddie Murphy theory. This one is actually pretty cool. Based on the horrifying concept art from Son of the Mask, it has been theorized that a character played by Eddie Murphy found the mask before Stanley did. The power was of course too much for him, therefore he put it back in the chest and dumped it in the Edge City River, where it would be discovered much later on by the divers we see in the opening of the first movie. Then of course Stanley and Tim would find the mask. This would be the reason why Eddie Murphy and Jim Carrey all appear as faces on those sperm cells. The less said about that, the better. But the idea that Eddie Murphy had the mask first is actually really awesome. Concept art. This here is some really interesting stuff. Originally, The Mask was conceived as a horror film, as we already covered, so obviously we got some interesting things here to look at. All of it is nightmare fuel. Here's one of Stanley ripping the mask off his face. Here's a few early designs of the mask. Here's his powers being showcased. Just imagine this version of the mask and what it could have been. And this entry also probably refers to the... you know what. Aside from those abominations, here's some concept art of Loki for Son of the Mask. Space Ghost interview. On the original VHS release of The Mask, if you stick around after the credits, you'll be treated to a segment of Space Ghost Coast to Coast featuring Jim Carrey being interviewed by none other than Space Ghost himself, Ansorag. At the time of this video's creation, this particular segment has not seen any other release other than the original VHS release of The Mask. It has never been included as part of any subsequent releases of The Mask or Space Ghost on physical media. This particular segment of Space Ghost Coast to Coast features, as mentioned, Jim Carrey, and it also features director Charles Russell. Let me just go on record by saying I loved Space Ghost, and I had The Mask on VHS growing up, so this segment has always been a favorite of mine. Lobo Mask. Lobo was crossed over with the mask in 2 issues of the comic book released in 1997. In the first comic, Lobo travels to Earth to find that a small time thief has possession of the mask. The two have a knockdown, drag-out battle that ends in a stalemate. The mask convinces Lobo that the bounty hunter is truly after the mask's last owner, who he says is a real bad person. He persuades Lobo to team up with him to take out the mask's ex-owner under the condition that Lobo share a portion of the bounty with the mask. Joker Mask. Joker Mask is a 4-issue crossover between the Mask and Batman, published in 2000. If I am not mistaken, this was the final Mask comic book in the original run. In the comic, the Joker comes across the mask in a museum. He eventually puts on the mask and raises hell. With the mask's power, the Joker begins to feel a new rejuvenation in his career of crime. Lieutenant Calloway finds his way to Gotham and helps Batman and Commissioner Gordon in defeating the newly superpowered Joker. Batman is able to trick the Joker into removing the mask by claiming that the villain is no longer funny, and is relying on tired shtick and the power of the mask instead of his own style. It is worth mentioning that the Joker himself had enough willpower to emerge from the mask's body, resulting in a two-headed being, in order to remove the mask on his own. Lieutenant Calloway asks Batman to give him the mask. Batman agrees, and the mask is last seen as Calloway digs up Stanley Ipkiss' grave and buries the mask there with his corpse. Yeah, Stanley died. We'll get to that. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all she wrote. That concludes part 1. I hope you enjoyed this first part because it's been in development for a while now. It's not my intention to sound condescending, but if you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe, as there's more awesome content on the way in the future. Well anyway, to quote one of my idols, good luck, get rich, get famous. Good night everybody. We'll see you next time.